Well, good morning from New York, good afternoon, and maybe good midday for wherever you are. Welcome everyone to this Women in Tech and MENA MITT Summit. It's really my pleasure today to greet all of you join us, and in particular, I'm very honored to have such a prestigious panel of speakers with me today, experts from around the world, joining us for this discussion where we are going to look really into how internet and why internet should be fundamental right, and what we can do to reduce the digital divide altogether. So today, very pleased to greet Dr. Michael Amiridis, Chancellor of the University of Illinois, joining us from Chicago. Danielle Geters, who's the president of the MIT Undergraduate Association and who's just a bridge away from me in New Jersey, from Manhattan. Dani Arazi, who is the serial entrepreneur and serial investor and president of the Yaitzu Forum in Israel, joining us from Tel Aviv. And Adel David, who's the director of the Arab region for the UN International Telecom Union, and Adel is joining us from Bahrain. A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank us for agreeing to give us your views on this very topic. And before we start a little bit of the context, although the role of digital connectivity has grown exponentially over the last few years, it is also true that we've never really seen or never been so acutely aware as we have in the last months of how much we depend on being connected. We've seen surges in traffic and internet usage of up to 70%, even just a couple of months into the pandemic. And really, this was due to all of a sudden this incremental increase in remote working, remote schooling, but also keeping ourselves informed, keeping ourselves entertained, and simply keeping ourselves connected with our families and friends with whom we could not physically. So, what the crisis, as I like to also, is that how acute the digital divide is. And that it exists everywhere. So all of a sudden we realized that, it didn't matter whether you were in least developed economies where we knew that internet was lagging behind, but also in the most advanced economies of Europe and the US, where we've seen a gap in connectivity and also a gap not only in the rural areas, but in urban areas, where we've really started seeing that, the capacity was an issue. Some of you that might be joining us from the US have seen a couple of weeks ago, video of two children trying to connect, sitting at the back of their cars in a taxi parking lot, somewhere in the middle of the US, just trying to have connectivity to be able to do their schooling. So really our ability to gain education, to be able to work, employment and information is really crucial for our life. But ultimately, it depends on where we live and our economic circumstances. And I think the ITU, and I'm sure Adel, you will tell us more about this, but the ITU recently estimated that we will need about 428 billion US dollars to be able to connect and give universal affordable broadband access for anybody who's 10 and above. So all of these challenges, challenges we are facing today, our guests today will share their experience on why equal access is being so critical of the future generations. Danielle was here on the panel today. But what actions, most importantly, we can take all together to reduce, the digital divide and ensure that we leave nobody behind. So with that, I'd really like to invite, each of you in turn to really give us your views on how we build back better to the medium and longer term. And I may probably start with a question to all of you that, maybe as a way of introduction, give us a little bit of the background on what your organizations are doing, what your organizations are, but also if you could tell us what are the biggest challenges that your organizations and yourselves have been facing in the last 6 months with the pandemic. And if you can explain what your organization or yourself again are doing to address these challenges and to help reach the digital divide. So maybe I'll start with you, Michael. As a professor and an academic, over to you. Give us a bit of an outline.
Thank you, Isabel, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are listening to us. You're spending your time listening to us. Isabel, if you had asked me in January of this year, what is the probability that every university in the United States will transition to an online platform completely within a 2-week period? Very quickly, I would tell you that the probability is 0. Right? And I think that this would be the answer across the world. And yet we did it. We did it under pressure. We did it under unique conditions over a 2 to 3 week period in March and in April, and all of us transitioned to an online platform. That was very challenging. We faced a number of challenges. We faced cultural challenges. Academic institutions are extremely progressive in trying to change the world, but they're fairly conservative when it comes to changing our own business models. We face challenges in terms of familiarity and confidence levels in being in an online environment, especially from a number of faculty that may not have the experience, they were not prepared. And of course, we faced access challenges, as you mentioned. And I agree with you, the image of the 2 young girls in California sitting outside in a Taco Bell and try to do their homework in the parking lot is disturbing. It is problematic. We faced similar problems in terms of access at the University of Illinois at Chicago. A large number of our students are coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They come from the neighborhoods of Chicago, and they do not necessarily have the means to have a smooth transition to an online platform. All of them have cell phones, but do not necessarily have laptops. And I don't know if any of you has tried to write a paper in a cell phone or do some math homework in a cell phone. It's not easy. It is difficult. They may not have the necessary software, and they may not have stable internet where they are. And of course, this situation was also overloaded with younger siblings who are in the K-12 system that they needed to be online as well, and so on. So to address some of these issues, as soon as we started the transition online, we started shipping out laptops and hotspots, over 2,000. By now to our students to provide them the basics that they needed to be connected. We created virtual computer services, lab services. So in essence, allowing them to connect to a server and using the capacity of the virtual computer and using their own device, if it was an older device, just a screen, to be connected. So the work actually was done somewhere else to make sure that we upgrade their devices. And also we strengthened outdoor Wi-Fi wherever we could. Did we solve all the problems? Not necessarily, but I think that we have made significant progress under difficult conditions, and I'm very proud of the response that we showed. And Isabel, I'm about to say the most popular phrase in the last 6 months. You're muted. So now you're back.
It's true, I'm muted. And by this, I might ask some of my panelists as well that are not muted, if you could mute yourself. We're hearing a lot of background noise. So maybe Dan, that would be great. Thank you. But let me move on swiftly. Very interesting to see. And I love the fact that you say, which is again, something that we've heard. It's such a sort of a, COVID sentence that we have achieved in the last 2 weeks what we never thought would be achievable in 10 years, and in terms of digital transformation, digital advancement, I think that is really what we've been going through. So let me move on maybe now to Adele, joining us from the ITU. And Adel, from a policy and perspective again, like, so what does your organization do, and what did you do, like, as a way of introduction? Again, what were the most challenges you saw, and what you did to address them in the short term?
Thank you, Isabel, and I'm glad to be here on this panel with all you distinguished delegates. The International Telecommunications Union, of course, is a United Nations specialized agency for information and communication technologies. We have around 193 member states as members of the ITU, and nearly 800 private sector entities and academic institutions. Of course, the ITU being a specialized agency for the United Nations, we always strive to bring together the views of the different nations, the private sector, the public sector, in trying to achieve the collaboration and cooperation towards a better welfare for human beings across the globe. Talking about the challenges, Isabel, well, the first challenge, I think, is mainly for us, everybody. It's just to work from home and work virtually. That has been a challenge. At the ITU, with all this membership, I'm sure you can realize that having people in a meeting room to discuss, to negotiate, and agree on ways of developing the technology, like the 5G was discussed in the last World Radio Communication Conference, or developing standards when it comes to the Standardization Bureau of the ITU, or even working on national projects within the member states at the local and national level. Not having the leverage of physically being able to conduct these activities has been a great challenge. So nevertheless, the speedy emergence of the right tools in the industry has made us overcome that challenge. We are now talking about virtual meetings across the board, virtual assistants across the board. I'm sure a few years back when you were talking about a doctor doing an operation virtually, that was sort of a futuristic look. But with today, I think all industries, when we look at any industry across the board, everything is now being conducted part virtually and part physically where possible. And I think that's where the world is heading, and that's a challenge that we at the ITU have been facing and overcoming recently in the activities of the union. Back to you.
Thank you. And I'll come back to that maybe, but I think that is very interesting what you're saying in terms of just the sheer nature of the UN work, right, and similar organizations, the sort of interaction, the physical interaction that you need to advance what we need to advance on digital divide is in itself a very compelling challenge, I think. Dan, as you come from a different perspective, and you also, I think you were one of the first, you created the first mobile operation, in operator in Israel about 25 years ago. You've been in the game for quite a while, so what was unusual, in the last 6 months? And again, from your perspective as an entrepreneur, as an investor, what were the biggest challenges, and what are you doing in order to increment or to reduce rather this digital divide,
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to make a comment on the hospitality of the Sharjah Institute. I'm very excited. Being an Israeli, you're all aware that there was a sign of a peace treaty between Israel and several Arab countries, and the Emirates were the first to have it, and we're all excited. And I think this is a beginning, and we look forward for cooperation in the near-term future. Now, to come to your question, I come a long way with my involvement in internet access. 25 years ago, my company was the world first to introduce broadband access over old copper wires. This is the ADSL that survived till now. Initially, we provided 3 megabits per second, replacing the old analog modems with 64K. It was the first time you could easily send picture or even short video, not the need to make all-night dispatch of or transfer of 3-minute video. I'm sure some of you still remember those days. Today, companies that I'm involved, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, I'm not anymore an active executive, but I'm exposed to really the forefront of technologies that Israel in many respects are the hub for. For example, outstanding remote telemedicine. A company that I'm involved with is Smart Digital Stethoscope, enable people in remote rural location to be diagnosed remotely, or existing new system enable safe dispatch of documents to be exposed only to designated recipients. And more, we are focused on serving those with very limited resources. I think this is a main focus of the group that I'm involved with. We are looking at the third world, we are looking at Africa, we are looking at people who do not have a very basic access even to a phone with internet. And we're trying to solve technical issues so that the world become more and more communicated.
Thank you, Dan. Very enlightening. Danielle, you are at the other side of everybody. You know, we've heard so far everybody from Adele to Dan to Michael. They are providing the services in one way or the other. You are the recipient at the recipient end. So, you know, for you, what have been the challenges as a student, as the head of your association in a university, and you know, tell us a bit more about what you've done and what you think you can do to help bridge the digital divide from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think initially with the COVID-19 outbreak, our biggest concern would be equity. Just knowing that college campuses for a long time have really tried to be an equalizer, just in terms of people's home situations, what they would come onto campus, what resources they would have. So I know in March when we knew we'd have to send people home, one of our biggest questions would be, some people don't have internet access at home. How will they Zoom? How will they be able to attend classes? And MIT was really proactive in terms of making Wi-Fi routers accessible, doing a smaller iPad loader program, a computer loading program. So over the summer, a lot of our thoughts were, how do we make sure that the fall, right now we only have seniors on campus. So how do we make sure that everyone who's remote has the resources they need? So MIT actually did a lot of research just in terms of software that would be accessible. So there's a bunch of different things from Zoom to explain everything, to Mural, to Canvas. And we're really just leveraging the technology that's out there. We've also just made sure that any student who needs so, they can request a hotspot and it will be shipped to them. We also have an iPad and Apple Pencil loaner program, something that's really big at MIT, specifically as it's a technology school, it's collaboration. And I know we spoke about like solving problems. So the iPad loaner program has had a lot of participation, and it's been very big for us. So I think just really thinking about equity and making sure that if somebody needs it, they can get it very quickly as well. I think it was already said, but just in terms of in the spring, thinking about how much bandwidth coding takes, how much storage Zoom has also is a different thing. So understanding that people in some humanities majors might have a different need for technology than somebody who's doing computer engineering, and understanding that you need to provide resources for both is something that we're really thinking about.
Thank you, and very interesting to see from your end, you know, what you had to go through and what you could help. This brings me, maybe Michael, going back to you. So you know, I think UNESCO very recently published that about 1.3 billion of school university learners are still out of the classroom as we are going back to school, as it is, you know, in some places. So as a professor and where you sit, you know, Danielle talked about skills, you know, that are needed. I think affordability is such a massive issue here as well, to connect, you know, all the students that we need to connect. So as we are moving towards what is going to be not permanently an online system, but a more permanently, definitely a more hybrid educational system, right? We know pretty much that we're never going to go back to full-time face-to-face education. What do you think are the most effective steps that we can take to accelerate education online? From, whether it is in the US, whether you are in sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Europe, what concretely, what it is, we know there is no way back, right, from this point on. So what can we do to really accelerate this even further, but most importantly, make it affordable, and most importantly, making sure that everybody has the skills?
Well, we know for a number of years now that online education is a new tool that can revolutionize the way that we teach and we learn. In fact, there are people that they have compared it to printing, right? And the education before Gutenberg and books and the education after Gutenberg and books. These are to a large extent the tools that we have, maybe the new books. They speak back to you. They're very interactive and they're different than the old ones. The silver lining in the emergency that we faced, and it has been, the numbers that you quote from UNESCO underscore what kind of a global emergency we faced and will continue to face. And the silver lining there is that we broke a barrier. We were forced by necessity to break a barrier, and pretty much every faculty member and every student now has experience in what online education is. Not necessarily the best online education because we were not as prepared, but we are improving as we go through. One of the challenges that we face is that for decades now, we have been telling our students, and the research that we have conducted supports this, that you learn as much outside of the classroom as you learn inside the classroom. It's, academics are in love with their voices. I'm in love with my voice as well. And we think that the students listen to us all the time and they learn everything from us. But the reality is that they learn a lot from each other. They learn a lot from experiences that they have, from their engagement in the labs, in different projects. So our message to them for decades is stay on campus, participate, being physically present, take advantage to connect. These are great benefits, and clearly they enrich the experience that our students have and prepare them as professionals and as engaged citizens as well. Now, in the last few months, we're telling them stay at home, be socially distant, right? So it goes to some extent against our instincts and against their desires. So the challenge that we have is how can we enhance these virtual experiences that we have and supplement them with the components that are absolutely necessary to educate these young people. Can we have a holistic approach beyond just delivering classes, in a holistic experience that will find the right balance between instruction and participation? Can we address the access issue more effectively? Because quite frankly, I was very interested to hear from Danielle, MIT's response. It's the same response that most of the universities took, but that's not a long-term solution. There's more that is needed. There are patches right now in emergency situation. If we do all of this, and I'm glad that you're talking about a hybrid model, because I think that for the large majority of the students, it's not going to replace the face-to-face experience, but it's going to supplement the face-to-face experience. It's going to improve it. It will give flexibility and opportunity to the faculty to do other things, to focus on different issues. And also for some students, in the US, for example, working adults, military, they may not have any other option. It may be completely online, but for a number of them, it's going to be a hybrid. So I think that if we manage to address these issues, we are heading towards a new model in higher education and beyond.
Thank you, Michael. And that brings me back a little bit to Adele and the role that you can play as such a critical institution and cooperating with organizations such as us, such as the World Economic Forum. I know we did in the midst of the pandemic, on the onset, back in March, we came together, ITU, World Economic Forum, World Bank, the GSMA, to do an action plan, right? To ask and help guide the governments take the measures they needed to take in this emergency, to have capacity on the networks, to make sure that, services were affordable. So this type of cooperation was absolutely critical. So do you think the most effective measures that governments in particular can take and put in place to accelerate connectivity and access? I think, Michael, you were saying access is critical. And without access, we can talk about skills, content, education, telemedicine, whatever we want. You do not have the core, which is the connectivity and the access, none of that can happen. So what do you think is urgently needed, Adel, to increase connectivity, also to increase the way people can do that? And what is really the role of government? And where do you see that cooperation, and collaboration is most needed? In particular, as you said, the challenges of collaboration and negotiations that are happening online.
Thank you, Isabel. That indeed is a very important aspect. First of all, as ITU, we've always tried to bring together all the stakeholders in the mix, if you like. Governments play a very important role because they set the policies within the country. The private sector as well is a very key stakeholder in this whole event because they provide the services at the end to the end user. Now, I think we were lucky that 5G was finalized last year before the pandemic, so we have a new technology that can deliver high-speed bandwidth wirelessly. Now, speaking in today's delivery, last year the ITU conducted a study where it found that around 57% of the world is connected. So if we mathematically calculate, half of the world almost is not connected. Now, the speediest way to connect everybody would be wireless. Maybe some people have issues in terms of quality with the wireless or accessibility and some difficulties, but overall, wireless connection is easier to access. Now, in the work of the ITU, we've tried to bring together the stakeholders to work together. That's number one. To put best case studies to ease the access to the end user and the consumer. We have seen a few governments in the region, and I'm talking about the Arab region in particular. A couple of the governments in the region have waived off some fees related to, for example, spectrum leasing, accessing certain sites, sharing of masts and towers within the region. All these have contributed more towards the ease of rolling out these services, the ease of expanding the network even more so that more people can actually access and be connected. And I think that has been the key.
Thank you. And that's really important. And how, just to follow up, how do you think you can sort of share these best practices? So for instance, if there is a government that has taken the right measures, is there a way of communicating that to the broader base of other governments to incentivize them to do that? Do you have a mechanism to do that could accelerate?
The current mechanism that we're utilizing is through regional webinars and workshops that we conduct with all the policy key stakeholders. Just as an example, today at the regional level, we had a cyber drill, which is a cybersecurity activity for the region, where we had the different CERT centers or security centers around the region talk about the importance of security of the networks now that you have this becoming a backbone of all the other industries. So we try to conduct as much as possible these webinars and workshops to bring together the views and make sure that we don't spend a lot of time in writing a white paper. We actually bring the experts within around the discussion, if you like, virtual table, if I may say, and share their experiences, share the difficulties that they faced, and maybe address some of the concerns that people have coming from different backgrounds as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting. Dan, I just wanted to move to you to ask you a question, which is more about, maybe contradicts what I just said to Michael, initially, but that, connectivity is crucial, but content is king, right? And I think it's somebody in Microsoft who said that a few years ago. So as we see, in particular in the light, of the pandemic, that an increasing number of more vulnerable segments of the populations have access to digital communications, how do we protect those most vulnerable populations against anything that goes with content, right? Fraud, cyber threats, privacy breach, content manipulation. How do we protect our society against this?
I'm afraid that in the near-term future and even in the long-term future, fraud, cyber, privacy breach, they will become the modern crime. And we will see more and more of it. And always the hackers will be ahead of us, the developers and the people who bring new technology. We have to face this reality. And instead of robbery, we'll see hackers that put their hand on the poor people's savings. And I'm very concerned, and I encourage all my colleagues, let's try and find solution for it and not give up. And some of my colleagues who come from defense background, etc., are trying their best to come up with simple solution that will avoid this current and future transformation of crime from the street into the online. So this is one concern. I like to go down to earth with other issues which are related to the situation that we face today. And I think it's also will have to do about the future. For example, I have my family, I have 4 grandchildren living in one apartment, all of them trying to participate in the kindergarten and in the school in remote learning. And how do you provide family with 4 kids, 5 kids with access simultaneously? This is not simple for the parents. This is not simple for the pipeline to provide access. And also, there is another concern and view of mine, which is not technical at all. It has to do with, while kids remain at home studying remotely, where is the socialization that you get in the school? How do you compensate for the lack of personal communication among kids? This is something we'll have to think about and to offer alternatives in terms of content, in terms of how do you make schooling more entertaining and so that the kids focus on their remote and do not have their teacher threatening them, keep quiet, and make sure that they don't, in parallel to the schooling, play games with their phones. There is a lot to learn and a lot to solve problems. Having said that, I'd like to bring up another perspective and something which I was involved with. We were trying to help a community in Africa to have access. So we came with great ideas of communication and simple access and software, etc. What we found out is the most challenging problem people had was to charge the batteries of their cell phone. Believe it or not, because somebody charged a hell of a lot of money in order for them to connect their cell phone into a generator who provide electricity. So we came up with some solution, but what I'm saying is sometimes you need to have to solve very basic technical issues in order to help people get access.
Thank you, and very interesting thoughts, because I think, you talk about the difficulty of, for instance, your grandchildren. You have 4 children in a home, you have 2 parents who are working from home, so all of a sudden you have 6 people in the same house trying to have access to broadband, and video zooming. But in a way, that is a luxurious problem to have, right? Because there are people at the other end of the world or some of the areas in the same country that may just not have even the money to have one right, that do not have that. And that brings me a little bit, Danielle, I'd like to have your perspective, because you really are, I look at my 3 guests here and myself, and we are probably of a different generation from you, Danielle, but you are the future, right? We look at you and you are the future. So it's not just about what you've learned from the last 6 months in terms of what needs to be done, but if you had a message to tell us, all of us coming from different backgrounds and organizations that in a way are going to help you, and if you had a message to governments what would it be at this stage from what you've seen from the last 6 months and where we need to be now in what the future is going to look different? How can we make those services for yourself, for your peers, affordable? But most importantly, how are we going to prepare you for the future? Because the world is going online. Do you feel you have the skills? Do you feel what needs to be done from where you sit to us to equip you with what you need?
Yeah, I think my biggest message would honestly be about stressing the importance of equity and how much equity matters. I know a lot of people prepared for internships and then heard their internships got canceled. So I think something else that's really big for my generation is adaptability and understanding that whatever company we're interning at may sign a full-term offer at, that they're willing to prioritize being adaptable for us. I think a lot of companies didn't foresee how many people would think about people losing their internships last summer, so maybe we won't apply this summer. And I think it's similar for schools. I think some schools weren't as good transitioning as online. They weren't thinking about equity. They weren't prepared for students needing more resources for them, and so they fell by the wayside. So I think just in terms of thinking about the extremes when coming up with a solution or policy is very important, specifically for our generation, because if not, we're just going to perpetuate systems of oppression. And people who are wealthy and have all the resources will succeed, where people who are disadvantaged, like we talked about, people who have to go to Taco Bell to do their homework, and people who have to drive someplace and can have Wi-Fi for 5 hours, but then the rest of the day they have no Wi-Fi. So I think just really thinking about making things equitable and giving people the resources they need is something that'll be really big in preparing us for the future.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And so let me maybe put those thoughts back to Michael first and Dan. I have the same question for you, but clearly looking at it from a very perspective, So the first question, which is what we had on the panel today, is, do you think that the internet should be a fundamental right? Like everybody should have access to the internet? And if so, I think the fundamental question here is, how do we reconcile having, internet access to everybody, everywhere in the world, with commercially viable sort of models, that we will have? So maybe, Michael, I'll start with you because you are at the recipient end, and Dan, I'll be very interested for you as an investor, entrepreneur, and industry, where you stand for. So Michael, maybe.
Well, to answer the question whether access to internet is a fundamental right, first we need to answer the question, what does access to internet mean? And what does it enable, right? Obviously, these days and in the future, it enables access to education, right? Is access to education a fundamental right? Yes, we all agree with this, right? It also enables access to work opportunities. The way that the workforce is working right now is, if you don't have access to internet to look at the opportunities, you're not going to get a job. It enables access partially now and more in the future to healthcare. The telemedicine example that Dan described has been flourished actually in the last few months during the pandemic. So if we're talking about access to education, access to work opportunities, access to healthcare, are these fundamental rights? I think all of us agree to this, and since the internet, access to internet enabled these processes, yes, the answer is yes, unequivocally yes, it is a basic right. Now, the second question that you ask is more complicated because of the different models that we have across the world in terms of the public sector. The size of the public sector and the financing of the public sector differs from country to country. In some countries and in some societies, it's unquestionable that this is a public issue. Right? In others, it is more of a mixed model. There's no question that the private sector has unique expertise to bring and to contribute. But how exactly do these expertise come in, and what kind of a model, where are we in the balance between the public and the private partnership will differ from country to country based on the organization of the structure of the public sector that we have.
Thank you. And Dan, just to look at that from a different perspective, and I loved, Michael, the way that you said the question is, what does it enable? What does internet enable, right? And whether what it enables is a fundamental right. And if it is, then yes, the answer is yes. So I really like that framing. But Dan, from a connectivity and you have a mobile operator. I've been I was at the GSMA for 15 years, the trade association for the mobile operators globally. And we've seen the struggle, if you want, the challenges of rolling out networks where there is no return on investment, which is why we haven't covered the whole planet. So how do you reconcile both? And do you think this pandemic, this crisis, of unprecedented magnitude has really changed the way even the industry, the mobile operators are going to approach the way they need to roll out, simply because the migration is different. People are migrating from cities to the country, and what do you see is different, and what can we do?
So I'll start with the answer to your last remark. I think the COVID-19 accelerated process that was already there. It just accelerated it. I think it exposed to many decision makers the problematic of access to the internet and availability of communication. I see internet, in the broadband internet, as a must-have, exactly like you wouldn't rethink today for a country whether the government will finance and subsidize education or healthcare. I see totally the same way about the internet access. I think it's the responsibility and the privilege of governments to provide access to everybody so that they are able to get telemedicine, education, entertainment, communication, whatever. It's must-have. Having said that, I come from the private sector for the business sector, and I think there are endless opportunities for entrepreneurs to come with ideas, solutions that will be profitable, which will make people happy, satisfied, and will be prepared to pay for services that private entrepreneurs like us provide. And one does not conflict with the other. I think once you have the basic platform, on top of it, layers of services, layers of solutions, layers of content can come from wherever. And I think there is possibility for great future as well.
Thank you. That's I love that perspective from the private sector. And Adel, just maybe a question to you without getting into the technicalities, because I don't think we have too much of a technical audience. But like one of the challenges we've seen as well in the connectivity is that there hasn't been a great cooperation between the different technologies that are available out there. And so, do you think this is a moment where terrestrial satellite, mobile operators, loons, where all the private sector could come together in a more cooperative way to not compete with each other, but collaborate and, close the gap where they can't close it singly, but look at solutions that are complementary to each other rather than competing with each other. Have you seen a change in the last few months in that type of cooperation?
Thank you, Isabel. First of all, I'd like to thank Michael for the way he put the whole internet need. It is a fundamental right for everyone. Yes, cooperation is becoming key. Recently, the United Nations in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development stated, leaving no one behind. And this sentence does not recognize any specific industry. Now, steam engine was a revolution. Discovery of iron was a revolution. I believe COVID-19 is another revolution in the timeline of human beings. The way we work, the way we act is all going to change. I don't think the future is going to look anything like the past. And I must say, every time we think that COVID is over and we're going to resume a normal life, or what people presume was a normal life, that's not going to happen. The norm has changed right now. we have seen within the industry, in the collaboration that the ITU has done with various industries. We've worked with the UNICEF on the GIGA project. We're working with the European Union on PRIDA, which is Connecting Africa. We've seen that there is more and more interest across the industry to collaborate and work together. Nowadays, within the telecommunication industry, where we used to talk about a regulator for ICT or telecommunications, we no longer talk about that. The evolution of regulating cross-industry as an infrastructure, a basis for all the services across the industry has now evolved. So I think it's not just as ITU that we're pushing for it. We've seen member states, governments, policymakers, ministers in their speech recently are all talking about this cross-collaboration amongst the industries. And it's not one industry that is more important than the other. It's every industry now depends in a cycle with all the other industries. And I think this has become key. Is the ITU doing anything about it? Yes, we are. We are promoting the concept of cross-industry regulation, cross-industry policy making. We are also bringing together stakeholders from other industries in the work of the ITU. I think now there are a lot of studies going around artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and that is not only related to a specific industry, as we see, it's across the board. So yes, the collaboration is there, and I see that it's growing as well. Thank you.
And that's a very important point, and that's what we advocate at the forum as well, right, where we represent 20 industries. And just yesterday we had, as part of the UNGA, we had a session on digital inclusion where we had representatives from the healthcare industry, from transport, from education, financial services, because financial inclusion is becoming crucial as well, right, online. And so that is going to be very important. And as you say, it is an absolute must now that the Minister of Finance speaks to the Minister of ICT, to the Minister of Transport, of Healthcare and Education, because if they don't speak among each other, you know, like as industry can go and develop whatever they want, but if the governments themselves, they need to, in a way, implement digital national plans that are a product of you know, collaboration between all of them. I just want to take a couple of minutes. Maybe I've looked at, you know, we have a question that has come out from the audience, which is a very interesting one, saying that, you know, there is really an increasing as well gender digital divide. And it's really a problem because we have few women in STEM. So maybe, you know, Danielle, I'd love to turn to you and maybe have this question from, I think it's Dr. Amina Yagoubi, who's a sociologist, who's asking us this question. You know, what is the solution from where you sit, you know, to more inclusive education in the world? And you know, what can we do? Is it a problem of education? Is it a problem of culture? And what can we do from where you sit? And Adel, I'll turn back to you as well of GIGA, because I know you've done a lot on that. But Danielle, very interesting to hear from you where you see the solution in this.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest problems that I see is representation and kind of media portrayals. I think just generally, if you don't see someone doing what you might think you want to do, there's just so many more obstacles mentally, and even just when we talk about mentorship and sponsorship. So I think one thing, specifically, I think I can speak to the U.S. best, that's kind of limited the amount of women and specifically underrepresented minorities in STEM is that representation piece, and just generally media, the portrayals of what somebody looks like in this role, what somebody might do. So I think something is to be very intentional about the images we use, what we teach in school. There's a lot in terms of teaching differently. If all the scientists you learn about are white men, what tells you you can be a scientist? So I think just really looking at that, looking at whose accomplishments we're highlighting, and then also just seeing what kind of systemic barriers there are in our education system, in terms of also maybe all your teachers are also white male. I know I never had a Black STEM teacher until this year, even at MIT, and he's teaching thermodynamics. It's my first Black teacher generally. So I think when you have something like that, then the question isn't really like, why isn't this happening? It's like, why are we doing this? And why are people even in the fields in the amount they are, I think that's a success. So I think once the fields start changing, we'll see that divide lessen.
Yeah. Thanks. All very interesting. And I think the change needs to come from the root, right? So it's people like you, Danielle, like, now at the forefront and that you need really to drive as well, to change the mentalities and change the mentalities as well of girls who might think that STEM is only for men. Because, we still see the science and all of these fields as men sort of dominated, and so that's in the mind. Adele, I know you've done ITU and UNICEF have launched the GIGA initiative last year during UNGA. Where do you stand? And again, with COVID, how does that accelerate the rollout of GIGA? And if you want to explain a little bit what it is for the people who are not familiar.
Yes, thank you very much. Before I go to the GIGA project, Isabel, if you would allow me on the point that Danielle elaborated just right now on the equals. Of course, in the ICT industry, we do have a lot of girls who are really promoted and very active within the industry. The ITU celebrates Girls in ICT Day. We take that very seriously, considering that our director of the BDT, the Development Bureau, Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, is a female, and she's doing an excellent job in the leadership with wonderful skills promoting the work of the ITU globally. So I do believe that girls in ICT actually play a very important role, and ITU is always supporting gender equality in all the activities that we do across the board, across all sectors. Coming back to the GIGA project. Of course, GIGA is an initiative launched by UNICEF and ITU, I believe in September 2019. And this initiative is about connecting every school to the internet and every young person to information, basically. So everybody has to be connected. And the goal was to establish or have this connectivity by 2030. Now, we have in the region worked very closely with governments. We've had a lot of support on that as well. We've been approached by several member states in the region to try to benefit. I wouldn't want to mention the names right now, but we have at least 5 member states in the region who are actively looking at connecting all the schools, connecting all the students. And I believe with the unfortunate circumstances of COVID-19, this has accelerated this need as well. And we are having some good plans coming up, hopefully by next year, on promoting what we've done within the region as well on GIGA.
Thank you. And I think, Michael, you wanted to say a few words on this as well.
Can I jump into this also for just a few seconds? I agree 100% for the need of role models and the images that they're projected. I think there are other issues as well. Pipeline and opportunity issues are there also. Recently, we started an effort under the auspices of the Melinda Gates Foundation, together with Cornell. Breakthrough Tech is what we call it in New York, and now in Chicago through UAC, to look at women in computer science, how to increase the number of women specifically in computer science. And we're looking at the pipeline before they come to the university, because we lose a lot of the students and the potential before even they come to universities to decide what they're going to study. And also looking at the pipeline past the university, what's happening in the workplace, what's happening in industry. And part of this program is to tie all of them together, to have programs in schools before the academic preparation, and also have internships. And Danielle mentioned that, guaranteed internship to these women, so they get prepared and they feel comfortable in the environment that they are going to be eventually.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I'd like to make one comment. I think we have to pay tribute to Bill Gates that on 2014 on TED lecture was clear, outstanding warning the potential outcome of pandemic. And I'm not surprised that it comes from somebody who comes from the technology background, not from the government, not from other or from medical. It came from him, and he pointed out entirely clear what could be the outcome of pandemic and how we should prepare for it. Unfortunately, many of the decision makers didn't listen carefully enough.
Yes, I think that is something that since March has been, repeatedly put in front of us, right? Of how this was ignored.
We have to learn the lesson.
Yeah. Look, I think we've come to the end of the session. I want to thank you so much, all of you. We had one question, which was, is internet a fundamental right? I think, Michael, you couldn't have put it better. If you think that education, healthcare, work is a fundamental right, then yes, in our new world, the internet is a fundamental right. So we will be all looking at you at the forum. We are doing this Edison initiative, and we'll be looking. I'll be joining with you as well to see if we can engage you in this to really accelerate this bridging the digital divide. So thank you again to all of you on the panel to be such wonderful speakers, and thank you to the audience that unfortunately in this world we cannot see, but we know you are there. So thank you so much to everybody, and have a good evening and rest of the day for everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you.